Well, good afternoon, and let me say what a distinct privilege it is to be in conversation with Paul Cox, some of whose films I've seen and liked immensely. And I was telling him when we met at lunch that there is nothing in particular that qualifies me to do this conversation. I'm sure there are many others who are, if you like, experts on Paul Cox's films. So I'm going to be a representative on your behalf and try and have a chat going with him. The format is broadly, we have about an hour. So thank you, Paul Cox, and welcome again to Trivandrum. As we were just told, Australia seems to be a favorite in the International Film Festival of Kerala. We have you as the chairperson of the jury, following on another illustrious director last year. So if I might begin by asking you, you're no stranger to India, to Kerala, to the film festivals here. What is your impression about the way this film festival has evolved in Kerala, and in terms of the package of films that you are seeing now as a chairperson of the jury, if that's not asking you to compromise anything as a judge there?
We're not talking specifics.
No.
The first thing that struck me very much is that all the films I've seen are dealing with the human condition in one way or another. And I can't tell you whether, even when the films are not spectacularly well put together at times, I can't tell you how delighted I am to see films that actually matter to our lives, to our death. Because usually the film, I always say that cinema is the most wonderful medium, but also the most abused and misused medium on earth. Because most films are awful and deal with a violation of body and spirit. That is such a great pity, because cinema could uplift and change all our lives. It has the power. And here I'm suddenly in a situation where people actually care. They care about one another, they care about the cinema. And people are very enthusiastic. They stand there, I mean, that's, the cinemas are full. You don't find this anywhere else in the world.
You mentioned violation of body and spirit, if I might pick up the thread there. You're assumably referring to the Hollywood, the Bollywood kind of film we are familiar with, which plays havoc with not just body and soul, but time and space in different senses. But you have always been an anti-Hollywood person.
Well, that's a very, very important question, I think. There is, for instance, when you read the gossip pages here, which of course I do, you'll find an amazing adulation towards Hollywood and its stars. In fact, also towards your own stars, which is totally out of end here. I think what we should all learn to do is ignore Hollywood. It is not, they export their hamburgers and their chicken wings, but when you export film, which has a direct effect on the way people think, feel and remember, and a direct effect on their dreams and the dreams of their children, I think you're dealing with something that is very, very, very important and very fragile, because you cannot just use that as a commodity. If you go to a meeting in Hollywood, we're talking about bums on seats. You are all bums on seats. I always regard people fellow dreamers. And very often, especially in the past when I started, and people thought these films will never sell, they were all wrong. Which still angers me at times, how difficult it was to make films that actually meant something to me, but also meant a lot to others, and they were not done with big egos and big budgets. But often I was asked, for whom do you actually make these films? And then finally I found the right answer. And I pointed at everybody in the audience, for you, for you, for you. And I kept going like that. Because for every individual you make your film, not for the lot of you, because people together are rats, and they behave like rats, which is unbelievable, because that's where our strength lies. We should also combine and fight, you know, and especially in film. I think it is time now in Kerala, and I find in West Bengal, you have a similar type of creativity and a similar type of spirit. And I think it is time now for the cinema here in Kerala to actually start moving, 20 years ago there was a big spirit here with Aravindan and all these people, Tom Abram, and suddenly people were interested, but it didn't travel far. Now is the time to actually start again.
Correct. And your one shot at Hollywood in terms of the film?
To keep control, because they say I'm a bit difficult. I'm not difficult at all, ask my wife. But if you don't have control over your films, I made this film which, when we had the first cut ready, it was bigger than Gandhi. It was a fantastic film. And several people sat there and said, this is marvelous. And when then the producers got together and said, this is not commercial enough. They were all wrong, you see, they were all wrong, because the greed, the hatred and the ignorance of us all together is pathetic. That film was then butchered and cut to pieces, and instead of all the long brushstrokes we used, cut into little snippets. Later on, when the film flopped, they asked me to restore it, which I did, but it never got its full glory back again, you know. So I beg every filmmaker, keep control, whatever happens. You make the film. The producers are not making the film, they're helping you. If you have a good producer, he helps you make a film. As soon as there is any fights appearing in the actual making, it's the most awful. I've had it twice that I was not in charge, and I'm not a power freak at all. It's just people run it. They don't actually understand. Only when the film, every film I've made, people advise me, don't make that film, it can't work. It's not, you can't make a film about old people falling in love with an old woman with cancer. It's not possible. They were always wrong, because after the film's been completed, a woman still, I think it was screened this morning, that still runs in Japan after 12 years. For 12 years, how is that possible?
Yeah.
You know.
In terms of what one might call a Paul Cox oeuvre, there are now, I think, people write about or speak about certain distinguishing features. There is your concern about the way you use light, the way you use music, for instance. It's a very strong element in your film. The intensity of human relations, the intactness of human dignity in the films. Now, this is obviously an extension of your personality, and therefore what I want to ask you is, you've gone through a traumatic personal experience.
No, I'm in my second coming now. Right. But after a very busy life, I was always too busy to even live properly or to have a proper meal. I was too busy. Never been ill. I'm suddenly being told that I have 3 months to live. And that does change a few things. I would advise everybody to go through the experience. I don't regret it at all. Of course, the pain and the agony and the uncertainty and the enormous sense of loss that you feel when you have to depart, that is terrible. But I'm now hopefully turning it into a positive experience and make a film that touches upon organ donation, because, you know, modern science has developed a lot of ridiculous war machinery that is so lethal. It's just very frightening. At the same time, they've also developed organ transplantation, I live by the grace of a dead person. And your body heals slowly, but the mind doesn't travel with it. It is, you're fully aware of that enormous, deep, great grief of man, and you somehow have no option but, of course, to proceed. But my steps are more careful, and I have much more time for the underprivileged, for the people that don't speak. I'm much more concerned about everything on the fringe of this madness, because the world we have created is relentless, and it lacks the true potential we have as human beings is not being explored at all in this world. And you see it all so very clearly when you lie in your hospital bed and watch the world. People come and visit one another, and then you look out of the window and you see the clouds passing by. And when people ask me, what do you want for Christmas? I always say, one little raindrop, you know, a passing cloud, and a smile. Because it's all this horrific consumerism that has caught us all. If we don't keep buying things, we perish. What sort of society is that? Doesn't make sense. And all these points that I had before already, of course, concerned about, they have all become very clear now. It's very different. And life is very precious and immensely beautiful.
So there's a kind of revalorization of life, of living. And it's very interesting because your films, even before you had this personal, shall we say, crisis, there was this whole undercurrent of terminal.
I was dying of cancer, and that happens to me then, and so you have to be careful. But of course now, the film I'm making now and developing is the actual hospital that saved my life. And in that respect, I'm very thankful to Australia, because I've always lived a fairly basic life. I don't believe in great wealth and fortune. I try to somehow look after my children, whatever. But I've always believed that every individual has the right to get the same education and health as anybody else. I've always think that is the basis of every society, and if that is not the same, forget it. There shall never be any justice. Everything is based on injustice and greed. So I had no insurance. My dear wife, who has also had a liver transplant, whom I met in the hospital, she had an insurance. We had exactly the same treatment. And if I'd been in America, I would be dead, you know, because the first thing, my credit card would not actually stand up to the advance, was because it's a huge thing. And so we all have the right to live. We all have the right to die properly, but we all should have the same treatment on that level. I cannot understand when I hear in America, when I see a banner in the crowd that says, Obama is a socialist, boo, boo, naughty boy. Well, sorry to say, I'm a socialist.
Music has been a very strong element in your films, and I've heard you or read that you're, and therefore, since music is so important to you, you're very impatient with lesser music, with what you call, what you think is lesser music. So I'm curious to know, how do you see India is a film, culture with a lot of music. Have you had an example, an occasion to taste a bit of that, and how do you react to that? Would you consider that terrible music, or is that an essential part of the Indian film ethos?
No, I think Indian music is absolutely, with Indian music you can actually travel and see visuals, you can go across the mountains, fly. Indian music is fantastic music in terms of visuals. But you remember the extraordinary moment when in Patha Panchali, when the husband comes home and with this little sari is after having been away for a long time, and his daughter has died, but the mother can't tell him that the daughter is dead. And he says, this sari is for our daughter. And then the mother screams, and you hear Ravi Shankar screaming in his sound. And that fusion of music and visuals, that is, the reverberations of that, if people paid attention properly, that for me was a very important moment in the whole history of film. Because music is the basis of all creativity. Yeats said, everybody's life is a symphony of sorts. The Indians really understand what music is about, because you can actually drift away with music. I've been to so many. I once went with Aravindan to a small village here in Kerala, and he put an old sheet, a dirty sheet on the wall, and projected one of his films. This was years ago. And the actual joy that it gave these people, it was a very significant moment in my life, because the simplicity of it all was great. The enthusiasm of the people was fantastic. And then they started to sing and to play. And it was absolutely mesmerizing. You know, when I first came to Kolkata in 1830, it's a long time ago, instead of people saying, you know, let's have a drink or something, they invited you home, and then they would sing for you, bring out an instrument. Well, you know, where else do you find this?
While you are here, a package of your films are being shown here, among them Innocence, which incidentally I like very much. And before I forget, there has been some discussion about whether another Malayalam film by Blessy called Pranayam is based on your film. I think you've already reacted to that. Have you had an occasion to look at that film or hear more about the film? I think the initial reaction was you have no problem with somebody being inspired by your film. But then you would ask for a copy of the film. Has it come to you?
Yes, where is the copy? No, I think it's marvelous. We're here to share our lives and our creativity and whatever, and our thoughts, our feelings, our hearts. If this had happened in America, even a slight copy of it, there will be people. People have actually been pushing me and said, why don't you sue him and everything, because everybody thinks it's good news.
Yeah.
It's nonsense. I'm very, very happy that this man hopefully stole the whole of my film. But at least he owes me a copy. I want to see it.
Do you want to tell us a little more about that? What the theme is, or it's too premature?
No, the script was finished. I wrote a book when I was supposed to be dying, and it's called Tales from the Cancer Ward. And I wrote it in the hospital. Sometimes I hallucinated and I scribbled things on the sheets and whatever. And finally I turned it into some sort of book, and the book came out, and I donated it to the hospital to thank them. So then the book traveled, and it is doing reasonably well, I think. But it is for the hospital, and then people kept telling me it's reads like a thriller in a way, because if you don't know what happened, you think I'm going to die, you know. It's a bit pathetic. But then they said, well, why don't you write a film script? So I thought, well, I started to write. And for some reason I had a dream about a time I had in China, and I involved China a little bit. It's based upon the book in terms of chronological order. The inner voice of the man I'm using. But then it becomes a love story, and it is quite a spatial love story, because you think very big in a hospital when they've told you to die. It's not more you and death, it's a big thing. And then there's, especially when I could still move about, sometimes against anybody's wishes, I would drive out of town, sometimes 100 kilometers, just to lie in the grass and look at the sky, the stars. That was a direct connection that gave me life. And I learned a lot from that now, also to use that in this film. It's a spatial love story. You'll find it's about a sculptor who is very successful, and he makes beautiful things. And then one day he suddenly doesn't feel well, and the doctor tells him you've got 3 months to live, which happened to me exactly. So if that experience is too good to miss out on, I'm using that. But for the rest, it is a very spatial. Then he meets a woman from the East, because I think if you want to live a proper life in this world, you've got to have one leg in the East and one in the West, or vice versa. And especially every person in the West should have one leg in the East. Because if we don't understand one another like that, if we don't interact, we don't have a world, you know. They're not separate worlds. I always think they're mysterious East, but I think the woman he meets comes from the East, and he falls desperately in love. And that horrible sense of loss you feel when you're fading is of course intensified that way. But he realizes that he actually has never loved like that in his life, because it's totally a giving love. You can't take anything. And love should always be a joy in another person, and it should always be a giving thing. So the theme, I think, is very powerful. And it was, I already did all the research and went to China to do it with the Chinese situation. But when I came back to India, I never thought I would see India again, you know, after my operation, because they said, you know, you have to be careful when you travel, etc. When I got here, now firstly we went to Goa, and then I came here and I thought, I feel India much more than China. I'm an Indian on that level. So we were talking one night, and the owner of the guest house we were staying in, or the beach resort or whatever it was, he came and talked to us. And he said, "Why don't we do